Hello, and welcome to the Alabama Public Health Training Network. Human trafficking is growing at an alarming rate, particularly in the southeastern United States, and identifying a victim can be difficult because the signs tend to be subtle. Today we will learn how to recognize red flags associated with human trafficking victims, including the safest and most effective methods of helping the victims. Thank you for joining us today for our program, Human Trafficking, Trauma-Informed Care and Treatment. If you have a question about anything being discussed today, please call or email during our broadcast. The phone number and email address are on your screen now and will appear again later in the program. Also, the handouts, sign-in sheet, and evaluation are all available online. You will need to register for this program in order to access those materials. Continuing education credits have been approved for nurses and social workers for today's program. In order to receive credit for this training, you must watch the entire program, then complete and return the sign-in sheet and evaluation. While content may continue to be relevant, continuing education credit will only be awarded for 1 year for nurses, expiring on June 30th, 2017, and 2 years for social workers, expiring on June 30th, 2018. If you are watching this program on demand and want to receive a social work continuing education certificate, then you will need to complete the social work test and send it in along with your sign-in sheet and evaluation. If you are watching this program live, there is no social work test required. I'm Renee Carpenter, State Social Work Director for the Alabama Department of Public Health. And with me is Tawan McCarty, founder of the Well House and Grace to Grace Consulting in Birmingham. Welcome back, Tawan.
Welcome. Thank you. Thank you. It's always great to be here.
Thank you. So go ahead.
So now it's my turn, huh?
It's your turn.
Well, first of all, it's always an honor, and I'm really excited about continuing what we started before. And just so everyone knows, the last time there was some testimony as far as my life and what's been involved. This time, I will use some of my experience to make reference and to help people understand more of what I really want to get into. So right now I want to go over the materials because the materials are essential for us during this training, and we will be referring to those. And so we'll have a sex trafficking glossary of terms, we'll have a texting slang worksheet, we'll have adult assessment, a juvenile assessment, and victim service providers for the state of Alabama, which was actually done by the Alabama Fusion Center, and it's a really great one that we're able to use and hand out. So first of all, I want to get into the definition of trafficking because we misunderstand that. And when it comes to children, we call them CSEC, which are commercial exploitation of children. And you'll see that, or DMST is referred to when you're looking up different references in regards to trafficking, which is domestic minor sex trafficking. That's what DMST stands for. And that is defined as children under the age of 18 that are induced into commercial sex. There does not have to be any force, fraud, or coercion in regards to children. Just the mere fact that they're a child and they have been exploited makes them a victim of trafficking. They do not have to identify. You can identify them yourself. And the good news is this year we passed Alabama Safe Harbor. It did pass this year, which means that 21 and under in Alabama will no longer be arrested for prostitution. They will be looked at as the victims they are, which is a huge step for the state of Alabama. Because prior to this act being passed, 16 is the age of consent for sex in Alabama. However, a 14-year-old could be arrested for prostitution, which did not make sense at all. So the good news is that we've had some changes and that doesn't happen anymore. And so the definition for trafficking for adults is they're induced into commercial sex, which through force, fraud, or coercion. And usually when those are prosecuted, you have to prove those three things, that it's force, fraud, or coercion. And those are sometimes difficult to prosecute. And the reason why is because adult victims don't identify as victims. They identify as it's their fault. They look at themselves, if I hadn't have done this, then this wouldn't have happened, or it's my choice. And I'll get into some details in a little while as to why they do that. Even myself, a few years ago, I would have told you it was my decision. I ran away at 15. It was my choice. So over the age of 18 and 21 kind of creates a dilemma. It's that area because 21 and under in Alabama right now will not be arrested for prostitution, but 18 is considered an adult. So you have to look at the force, fraud, or coercion. So there's that gray area that we're going to have to redefine. And when I say we, I mean service providers, lawmakers, and looking at those areas and seeing them as the victim they are and making sure they're not prosecuted or arrested. So the next thing I'm sorry, I'm so not used to using PowerPoint, forgive me. So these are the materials. This is the definitions included in the PowerPoint you have that I just went over for children and adults. And now I want to look at the hot spots, because you and I had talked about some of the questions that come up from the last training. And, you know, what does human trafficking look like? This map here is actually from the Polaris Project. And this is based on calls that have come in to them for the National Human Trafficking Hotline throughout the United States. And if you look, the East Coast is much more inundated than the West Coast is. And then in regards to Alabama, I blew it up so we could actually see some of the hot spots in Alabama and what's going. You see all along our southern border. And if you look at all of the red spots are actually hitting on our interstates. All of them are. The two right there in the middle that you can see right below the big one that of course is Birmingham, that's up 85.
So that goes between Montgomery and Auburn.
It's between Montgomery and Auburn. And these are just where the calls have come from through the National Center. Excuse me, but the calls that have come into the well house are from all over the state. But I wanted you to see, because they actually do a really good heat map as regards to that. And so when human trafficking in Alabama, it's definitely clear and it's definitely present and happening here. And there have been cases reported all across the state. Every law enforcement agency I've trained in the state of Alabama knows they have a human trafficking problem, whether or not it's been publicized. And so the next slide is, these are some cases that have been reported throughout Alabama. And one of the largest cases in human trafficking history, where the largest arrest made, was in Fort Payne, Alabama. There were 40 people arrested in 2011. And the reason I remember that one so well is because I had just opened Well House, and the media called me because the sheriff of that county had done a press conference, and the media wanted to know if I'd gotten any of the girls. So it was in Fort Payne. It is rolling green hills and countryside, and it was an 18-month investigation that was done by their local law enforcement, along with Homeland Security and ICE, which is Immigration and Customs Enforcement.
So this was a nationwide statistic? It's one of the largest in the nation?
Yes, this is one of the largest in the nation. Based on all the data that I've collected as far as the amount of arrests and the number of people that were arrested at one time. It's one of the largest ever. And these are just ones that cases have been reported in that we know of recently. Again, however, everywhere I've been, they know there's a problem with prostitution. The law enforcement's understanding it's a problem with trafficking. And I know there are areas that are more dense and that it's more of a problem, but this is all across our state. I mean, this is everywhere. And specifically the case in Dothan, that was the first case in Alabama that was prosecuted. And it was a man, he got a good bit of time, but he brought in a 15-year-old from Louisiana, and he was taking her along the circuit. And we'll talk about some of the terminology in just a minute of what I mean by that. So I remember in the last session, this was one of the questions, is what is the problem in Alabama? Mm-hmm. And this is from law enforcement with a number of cases that have been reporting. So before we get into the next topic, Renee, I want to apologize to everyone listening, because the terms that are used in trafficking are not pretty terms. And they're not sweet, and they're not nice, and they're somewhat, I will not go over the ones here, but I wanted to make sure it was included, because I think it's really important as social workers and nurses and service providers that people understand the language that's used. And so if you can look at your glossary, and I'll share mine with you. Okay. So you can see it. And I've highlighted some of the ones that I want to go over. But the glossary of terms for sex trafficking, like bareback. And people think, well, that's horseback riding. No, it's not. When in returns to trafficking, you're talking about a woman having sex with a man without a condom. And that will maybe something that he's asking her to do. Circuit, and I'm just picking some random terms that's from this sheet. The circuit is actually the areas that he takes her to. When I'm saying he, I'm referring to her pimp, that they will go around. One of the biggest circuits in trafficking is in the Southeast, and it's Atlanta, Birmingham, Memphis, Nashville, and Chattanooga. However, over the past year and a half, I have recently found a new circuit that's come up, and it's Montgomery, Auburn, Dothan, Columbus, and there's another city in Georgia, but it's like that. They're almost like circles that they tend to travel in and hit cities throughout. But what I really want people to understand in regards to a circuit is when you're sold from one city to the next, you don't necessarily move from one city to the next. You're sold at every single exit. And because of technology today, it's easy to set up pre-advanced purchases. And so you can advertise, I will be in Montgomery at 3 o'clock today, from 3 to 11. I'm only stopping for a short period of time, and you can set up your clientele during that time. And the clientele, you call them Johns. And it's actually on the next page of the second page of the glossary of terms. And a John that's the terminology for a man who is considered, who is a purchaser of sex. Daddy is another term, and that's what the pimps require their girls to call him. GFE is a girlfriend experience, which he kind of wants to purchase her as opposed to just to have sex. He wants to have the experience of going out on a date and having the girlfriend and then having sex. Or that may be a service that she's required to offer because the money is more. A gorilla pimp. A gorilla pimp is someone who's very abusive. They beat their women and girls into submission. One of the terms that's not included in this is a Romeo pimp. But I wanted to make sure everyone was aware of. A Romeo pimp is one that will wine and dine, and that will get them to the place where she feels like she owes them something. And that was the first pimp that I had. He was more of a Romeo pimp. Now, I have had a gorilla pimp, and they will beat you just because you woke up or you looked at him wrong. I remember getting a severe beating one time because I was putting his hair in a ponytail and I pulled his hair too hard. And it caused one of the hairs, I put my hair back and it caused one of the hairs on his head to hurt. And he literally beat me because of that. So a gorilla pimp is that type of person. An in-call at the bottom is a date that takes place at the escort's place of residence. An in-call means she may have a hotel room and she's taking an in-call service. An out-call is where she'll actually go out and meet them somewhere, or she'll go to their house. Another term I just referred to is a John. And that is a man who will purchase, or he's also called a trick or a lick, but he is a client or she is a client of prostitution. And women do purchase also, so I don't want us to get confused about that. One of the terms that's not in here that is used is a regular. And a regular is a man or a woman who purchases sex regularly from that person, and they tend to be more safe because you've known them, you've built a relationship with them, and you know who they are. And so if you hear a girl talking about a regular, that's someone she sees on a regular basis. Out of pocket. That's when she's broken the rules the pimp has given her, and he is reprimanding her, he is torturing her, or he is going to ensure that he doesn't lose respect in the scenario, because if it's on the streets or if others are seeing it, there's definitely going to be more retribution. But she's done something, broken one of the rules that he said you can't break. A lot of times, if they're out of pocket, they'll be traded to another pimp or sold to another pimp that thinks he can make her right or get her right. And so it can be a very bad thing. Because of technology now and the websites and stuff that are being used, we have different terminology because they don't necessarily post that I charge X amount of dollars. So they'll say roses. Bring me 40 roses. Bring me 50 roses. And what the roses are constituting is dollars. And so that's one of the ways they get it across. A stable is a group of women that a pimp has, where that means it's his stable of girls. And it can be anywhere from 2 to 10 or ever how many he has. A tract is an area of town that most towns have. I don't think I've seen a town yet that doesn't have an area where prostitution and the trafficking is more likely to happen. And one of the last things I want to talk about, the very last word on here is wifey. That is who you referred to. Say if you and I were with the same pimp, you would be a wifey to me, or a wife-in-law, or a sister-in-law. And so these terms, some of them I didn't go into. There's some in here that are not necessarily everyday language that you would hear, and it's not always nice. So, but I wanted to make sure that you're aware, because when you hear these terms, because I do know when were times when I have worked in social work settings that you'll walk through somewhere and you'll hear a conversation. And if you're understanding this terminology and you can pick up on it before that person comes into your office, you could potentially be aware of, okay, I heard this language, what's going on, and that gives you some other indicators of that she may be being trafficked. So the next handout is texting slang. And this one is a little bit different. And it's because texting is shorter, and you don't want, because texts do stay on the phone, and some phone carriers actually keep the text, and they can be, if an arrest were to happen, they can be subpoenaed, and you can get those records, whereas sometimes online stuff, when you delete it, it's gone. It's not necessarily as easily found. So texting, you're going to see more of the just the generic letters that are being used. So like a 304 is her. She's called a hoe. And I'm sorry to put it in that term, but that's one of the things. DDF is disease and drug free. And that means she doesn't do drugs and she's disease free. GFE is the girlfriend experience, like we talked about earlier. LH6 means let's have sex. And I wouldn't have ever thought of it. Some of the stuff I'll look at and go, because it's new technology and the way it's termed, I see it now that I understand more of it. PSE, porn star experience, which goes along hand with a girlfriend experience. But if he's been watching pornography or she's been watching pornography and they want to act out a scene, then this one can say, I've got this experience. And this is using some advertising when she does the online ads. STR with an 8 means straight, which is normal sex. You'll hear like straight, half and half, different terminologies like that, and that is signifying the services that she's willing to give. A half and half would be normal sex and oral sex combined. And T is, just the letter T is the identification for a John or a client. And again, because of the apps like Kik, Cash, Snapchat, the internet sites like Backpage and Craigslist, and there are others that are out there too. This terminology is used often. And so because I know sometimes if I can be sitting next to you or something, and even if I'm just sitting in the doctor's office and I see you texting and I see some of this come up, then I know that something could potentially be going on and I might be able to help you. Because of technology, trafficking's changed, and it's more online and social as opposed to on the streets than what it used to be, but it's still on the streets. I mean, I was out in the streets on Monday, this past Monday afternoon, and it's still there. It hadn't gone anywhere. But to divert being arrested, this is the way it's used a lot. So these are some of the things, and those are good things that you can refer to. And so some of the identifiers I want to get into are the red flags. And again, I'm using the CSEC term, but these are not only for children, but for adults also. You have a runaway. Of course, that is definitely going to be an issue because they're most likely having survival sex. And when I talk to kids, one of the things I ask is if you've run away, if you stay gone more than 48 hours. Because usually that 48-hour window is when hunger happens. Because we can go without food for about 48 hours before we actually start feeling physical pains. If they've been gone less than 48 hours, the likelihood of being trafficked is smaller. But longer than 48 hours, unless someone is actually helping them, that's a cousin or something, that they're the likelihood of survival sex is probably about 98% that has happened. And we don't necessarily look at survival sex as trafficking, but it is. The couch surfing, the trading sex for a place to stay, the trading sex for food, all of that is considered trafficking in regards to a minor. And so if you find out where that person's been and who they've been with, that could potentially be a case for law enforcement. And I'll get into some reporting stuff later. Homelessness, of course, is a huge identifier in regards to women or children that are, and men, that could be trafficked. If you're looking at kids and she's got an older boyfriend that comes in with her to seek services, then you definitely need to see what's going on in that situation, especially if she's 17, 16, or presents to be 17 or 16 and you think she's younger and he's 30-something, and there's something going on that needs to be researched. She has a new cell phone or items, expensive items that you know she can't afford. Even if it's a grown woman, if there are items that you know that she doesn't have a job, she's on food stamp, whatever the situation is, but there's items that she has that you know there's no way she could possibly afford, is definitely a red flag. Hair and nails done. Again, and that's not a red flag across the board, but those are just some things to look for. If she's 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, 24, 25, 26, 27, 28, 29, 30, 31, 32, 33, 34, 35, 36, 37, 38, 39, 40, 41, 42, 43, 44, 45, 46, 47, 48, 49, 50, 51, 52, 53, 54, 55, 56, 57, 58, 59, 60, 61, 62, 63, 64, 65, 66, 67, 68, 69, 70, 71, 72, 73, 74, 75, 76, 77, 78, 79, 80, 81, 82, 83, 84, 85, 86, 87, 88, 89, 90, 91, 92, 93, 94, 95, 96, 97, 98, 99, 100, 101, 102, 103, 104, 105, 106, 107, 108, 109, 110, 111, 112, 113, 114, 115, 116, 117, 118, 119, 120, 121, 122, and her hair and nails are done, and the clothing she has on, and I know clothing today is really difficult to tell because of the way our kid, I don't even want to, that just breaks my heart every time just thinking about it. But just being aware of those things. Brandings or tattoos, especially when you see the, where the scanner, where you scan, you know what is it? The barcode. Thank you. The barcode. Barcodes are definitely a huge sign. And usually those are on the neck, the back of the neck. Sometimes they'll be on the wrist or on the forearm somewhere. If she's got a barcode, I would say 99.9% that she's been trafficked. If she's not being trafficked, she has been at some point. Dollar signs, names that don't, like big money. If you see names like that, or his VITCH or something like that, or some inappropriate language that's tattooed somewhere on her. Loyalty, I have found, is a big one that a lot of girls have to have put on them.
Just the word.
Just the word loyalty, because she is required to be loyal. I actually saw a picture the other day. It was a 17-year-old that did a picture of her new tattoo that she was so proud of, and it was loyalty on her cheek. And it broke my heart because I knew what it was. And I knew what she was into anyway, but literally on her cheek. And that's can't be removed. The other thing that's happening is with the brandings and tattoos is happening on the inside of the lips. So they're not as noticeable. And it's like literally you could pull the lip. You won't see it if you're talking to them, but if you were to pull the lip down or they pull their lip down, you could see it. And it could be dollar signs or his names. We're seeing more of a trend of that also. But usually it's in an area that can be seen. It's not always hidden that people would think it is, because it could be on the legs or anywhere.
Are there certain tattoos that are associated with certain regions?
No, but pimps usually have their tattoo. So they will develop their own tattoo. So if you see multiple girls with the same tattoo in the same place that doesn't make sense, like it's a dollar sign or something along that, and it's got his like big money or smooth or ice or something on it that sounds like it's, what is that? You know, and but you see multiple girls with that on it, then it's definitely his brand on her. And because we're talking with nurses and stuff, I've seen vaginal tattoos. To where he's actually put her name or his name on her vagina, or to where it's right above her pubic area and it has an arrow pointing, "This belongs to me," or something along those lines. Recurring or multiple STDs. And this is something I really want the nurses and all, especially with everybody at the health department, to be aware of. Because the first time I had an STD, I was 14 and it was syphilis. No one questioned why I had syphilis at 14. They looked at me as being sexually active. I had PID, pelvic inflammatory disease, 5 times as a teenager. 3 of those times I was hospitalized. One time I was hospitalized for 5 days. Most time it was 3 days, but one time it was so severe it was for 5 days. And not once did a doctor or a nurse or any social worker come through, because it happened between the ages of 14, the last time I had it I was 17. Not once did anyone come through and go, "What's going on for you to have pelvic inflammatory disease?" Because it was all based on gonorrhea. I had gonorrhea in my tubes one time. Of course, through just a normal STD test, you can't tell that it's there because there are no symptoms outside of it. The abuse had caused it all the other times. The sexual abuse just from penetration had caused it all the other times, but not once had anybody ever taken the time to say, "Excuse me, you're 14 or 15, I'm looking at your record and this is your second or third time with PID. What's going on?" So I want people to be, especially the nurses, to be consciously aware that that is a huge sign. If you've got a 14-year-old with gonorrhea, chlamydia, and trichomonas, there's an issue. And I don't think it's just her being sexually active. There's something going on behind that. 14-year-olds can't be sexually active. Anyway, that's a whole nother training we'll have to talk about. But be very mindful of those STDs. No identification is definitely a big one. And I know since we are talking to the nurses, one of the big red flags that people don't understand is her shoes. If she's pulling something out of her shoes, an important document, that is a huge red flag. I'm a woman and can be raped, so you can get my clothes off of me, but try to take my shoe off, then it's going to be a problem. And that's the place of protection, the one place on your body you feel like you have protection. So if you see her going in her shoe for ID or something along those lines, if she does have her identification, be very mindful of something else going on, because that's her hiding place and that's her safe place. But definitely no identification.
So do their pimps take their identification?
Oh, absolutely.
Is that part of it?
Yeah, because if you get arrested, you can just give them a fake name. Because the likelihood of her being arrested is much, much higher than the likelihood of him being arrested. And he'll usually know her aliases that she'll use. Or she'll get her phone calls and can call him and say, I'm here under this name. And because law enforcement is so backed up, they don't necessarily always want to do the identification check to find out who she is if it's just a misdemeanor charge. Mm-hmm. Now, if she's presented with felony charges, they're required to go through more of an extensive background check. So, yes, it's pretty much a big red flag. Other identifiers are torture indicators, where she's got cigarette burns, she's got rope and handcuff burns on her wrists, there's something going on with her wrists, multiple tiny incisions in parts of her body that she couldn't possibly reach, that are patterned. Those are signs of torture. Patterned bruising, to where he's used a coat hanger or something with around a paddle, because I have seen paddles that were a wooden paddle that had a hole in it, so when you were hit with it, you were welted with you had circles on you. So be very mindful of patterns in bruising, especially in the wrist area too, and the ankles. If you see scarring, burn, old, what looks like either current or old scarring or burns, something's going on there. And even the girls that are cutters, that have cut themselves, be very mindful of that, especially if she's cutting herself in areas that are not presentable with just normal clothes on, because she feels like has to be hurt in order to feel anything. And so a lot of times she's using that as opposed to using drugs, or she may be using both. And it's because cutting releases endorphins automatically, it alleviates and helps pain at the same. It alleviates pain and intensifies pain at the same time, which gives her a sense of security. And I'll talk about that as to why that's a sense of security in just a minute. Physical trauma around the pubic areas. And let me give you an example. There was a girl that I was assisting, and her trauma was so bad, we took her to the hospital, and physically, right below her pubic area, on her thighs, like right at the juncture of her thighs, she had contusions that I've never seen any bruising like it. It was bruising with knots in it. And you could tell from the pattern of the bruising that it was knees that had been placed on the inside of her thighs up against her and holding her open. And so be mindful of things like that. That's more than just a sexual act. And she also had them all the way down her inner thigh. There was the other time this young lady was abused quite often. She had them at the inside of her knees, also, to where her knees had been held open, and she had like hand bruising on the inside of her knees. So be mindful of things like that. Be mindful of people that's with someone that they're talking for them. If you and I go somewhere and the interviewer or the person is asking you questions, but I'm the one who answers them, then something's wrong. Something's wrong with that picture, especially if it's a foreign national. I will tell you, good news is another law that passed that I'm not sure that you all are aware of, and it actually deals with assessments in regards to mental health and the health department, to where the state was not paying for the initial assessments, and we had a local person trying to get an assessment from a girl who was a foreign national. Her pimp paid for the interpreter. And so they couldn't get the information they wanted. And so once we realized this problem came into place, Jack Williams actually presented, and I can't remember the number, but it's passed, that the state will now pay for interpreters from beginning intake to the end of her treatment. So because that assessment phase was the biggest area, and that was the one phase that they weren't paying for due to something, but now they will pay for it. And so if we need an interpreter, if you need an interpreter, you can go to state level to get one, because you don't want someone outside of that paying for the interpreter and saying what she needs to say if she's a foreign national. You want to be able to conversate with her and talk to her about things. But if someone's talking and not letting that person talk, Please be mindful of that. So let's go to the flip side of expensive stuff where she has nothing. The only thing she possesses or owns is the clothes on her back. That is definitely a sign, because that means she's lost everything, she's left everything, or someone's taken everything from her. And so just be mindful of that situation. She's had the same clothes on for 3 days. Find out why. What's going on? She avoids eye contact. Doesn't want to look at you. She's scared of you. She's not oriented to time or place. She doesn't know her location. She doesn't know what day of the week it is. I remember there were many, many times in life that I would have to ask, what's today? Because I didn't know. Or would wake up and not know where you're at. So if they don't know their location, and they don't know the day of the week, if they don't know what's going on, and if it's not an organic, developmentally delayed person, then find out, where were you last that you did know, what's going on. Okay, I think I've covered all that one. Let's go to the next one on red flags. If she's fearful, anxious, depressed, nervous, or if routine procedures or interviews make her paranoid, there's a reason. Or if she's paranoid that person's there and they're answering questions for her and it's obvious she has a sense of paranoia, something's going on. It also could be that she's been abused by medical professionals or medical personnel, or she's had medical torture happen to her outside of or in a different setting, and so she's afraid of that. I remember the first time my legs were placed in stirrups. It terrified me because stirrups have been used as a torture device. So just be mindful of what you would think would be a routine, normal procedure that she has an anxiety attack or something. Be mindful of those because you don't know what her pimp has used to hurt her. So the needs of trafficking victims vary depending on their circumstances. And one of the greatest challenges we need to overcome are the barriers we face regarding services to victims. We're finding there's a lot of services out there, and we need to utilize those for victims because it's so important, and we need to look at across the board what they need. And we've got to think outside the box. And so this is my kind of thinking outside the box thing that I want you to think about. We can't solve problems by using the same kind of thinking we used when we created them. We've got to start thinking of different things. And if trafficking has been around for years and years, and we're just now identifying as trafficking because we formerly called it prostitution, then we've got to think differently about her and about how we treat her and about what services we provide for her. That normal treatment doesn't always work. So, what do persons that are trafficked endure? We've talked about some of it. Let's talk about a little more detail. So, sex, they're sold multiple times a day, and every single time is rape. I don't know how many times I can reinforce that. Every single time is rape. This is not her wanting to have sex with someone. This is not him wanting to have sex with someone. This is saying, you get in the mindset of this is my job, and this is all I'm worth, and this is all I'm worthy of, and finish, be done, and leave me alone. And every single time is rape. And the emotional and spiritual and psychological issues that I'm still working on them. This is years that it takes to actually get to the other side of this to see the victimization. Because as long as we blame ourselves, then it's okay. Trauma. And all trauma is trauma, but when you've experienced sexual trauma, physical trauma, emotional trauma, mental trauma, sometimes spiritual trauma, so where some of these girls have been raped in the name of God, you have to look at that. You have to look at everything because you're dealing with every facet of that person. The tortures, that they're drugged and addicted. And I don't want us to think, I know we talked about this before, but drugs are not the problem. They're a symptom of the problem. Healthy people don't get high. People want to say, well, it's just drugs. She's just doing it for drugs. Well, yes, it becomes a vicious, ugly cycle. Absolutely it does. But drugs are not the issue. They are never the precipitating problem. They're a symptom of it. It's the virus that we have to deal with. And the virus is that at some point she's been hurt to the point that she's got to have something to cope with it. She's got to be able to, or he's got to be able to deal with what's happening in their lives. And the only way they know how to fix that is to medicate. So drugs aren't the problem. STDs, we talked about that. HIV and Hep C. I don't know how many of the girls I know have died from one or both. because they didn't get treatment, they didn't have insurance, couldn't afford treatment, nobody would give them treatment, or they did not even, or they weren't identified as, they had not been diagnosed as having the problem. Pregnancy, unwanted. Please be mindful of multiple abortions. That's another red flag that I didn't mention before. If a woman's had multiple abortions and she's using abortions as a birth control, there's something going on. We're talking 2, 3, or if there's, you know, if we're talking many abortions, or if she's got signs of, physical signs of abortions that were not done in a clinic, to where it's been coat hanger or something along those lines, that she's got some scarring in those areas that you could tell. Definitely. So now I want to get into a little bit about the teenage brain. And the reason why I want to talk about the teenage brain is because at one point we were all teenagers. And we have to look at what happens to the brain when abuse happens, because what I have seen is across the board, it never starts as an adult. Ever. The abuse always starts as a child. And when I say child, I mean 18 or under. So now we know that brain imagery, that your brain, you're not biologically done growing until you're 26 to 28 years old. Isn't that just crazy? But if you think about it, most people develop common sense about 26 years old. If you think about life changes in people, it's somewhere between 25 to 28 that they made drastic life changes and develop common sense. And so if trafficking happens in puberty, and we have proven with research that abuse stunts growth, it stops growth. How can we expect her to be 22 or 23 and her brain stopped functioning when she was 13? Because of the abuse. And so we have to look at that too. So the next one goes in a little more detail. So the last part of the brain to develop is your prefrontal cortex. It relates your ability to determine good and bad, better and best, the future consequences of current activities, working toward a defined goal, prediction of outcomes, expectation based on actions, and social control, which is the ability to suppress urges that, if not suppressed, could lead to socially unacceptable behavior. If that's the last part of the brain to develop at 26, and it stopped at some point, and her normal or his normal is being sold, how can you expect any different? And so this is my favorite question to ask, that whenever I'm anywhere, I ask this question, because I think everybody in here is over 18, right? In the studio audience. Right. Did you have an epiphany on your 18th birthday? Were you financially secure, emotionally stable, and spiritually mature because you turned 18? I've never met anyone who was. And because of that, and I do understand policy, because actually policy is one of my favorite topics in the world, that you have to have a definition or a line between juvenile and adult. But just because they turn 18 or 21 or whatever that defining age is, the brain hasn't necessarily stopped, and they still haven't achieved everything, the ability to make those decisions. And let's exacerbate that with abuse that's happened in the past, and knowing that that person has stopped developing at the age that abuse started. When I met my counselor in 2012, and I'm still seeing my counselor, I probably had the emotional ability of probably maybe a 13-year-old. And in 2012, I was 41. I was about to be 42. And I look back now realizing that I stopped growing. Now, through treatment and counseling and different things, you can actually change that. But if you're dealing with someone that's still being abused, and their abuse started at 12, you can't expect a 25-year-old to make a 25-year-old decision if the abuse has happened from 12 to 25, and they stopped at 12. You're dealing with a 12-year-old, even though she looks 25. And so we have to understand that. And so that's one of the reasons I wanted to talk about the brain functions. So stress. Let's talk about the effects of stress, because stress is the outcome, or is actually what happens with abuse. Too much fear over too much time too quickly changes your brain. It totally reconstructs the endorphins and your serotonin and everything. It changes everything. The body can react in fear when there's no longer a threat. It's called PTSD. It happens regularly. And trust me, that's one of those things that even with treatment, you go, is this ever going to end? Because even after years of treatment, this past year, I had about a 6-week period, and I think I'd shared it during the last training session. I had about a 6-week period that it was like I was having these attacks that were out of nowhere. And I couldn't figure it out. And I went to my counselor. I'm like, what's going on? She said, Tawan, you cannot have an attack for 10 years, and all of a sudden a noise happens or something happens or a smell or somebody says something, and then you're right back in the same place again because of the way the brain does. Triggers, as I'm talking about, can cause a relapse. You're unable to think rationally during that time. It affects your short-term memory, your ability to recall in linear chronology, the emotional regulation, and your ability to pay attention and motivation. So if you're trying to interview someone, or you're trying to do an assessment on someone, and they've got this person that's sitting out in the lobby waiting on them, the ability to recall some of the stuff that they just may not be able to. They may be terrified that if I tell you too much and I go out here, what's going to happen to me? Or God forbid you get up with, you're my social worker and you're assessing me, and God forbid you get up with me because you want to meet the person I'm with, and then you say something that you think is helpful, but to them it's not, and I go home and get beaten because I don't know how he's going to react or she's going to react, whoever the person is that's with me. And yes, she's can be pimps too. So you have to think about all of that when you're looking at them. The other effects of stress is you have lower levels of dopamine and serotonin, which affects your sleep, which also is a trauma in and of itself. How many of you have been sleep deprived before? Cramming in college or whatever the situation was, you just couldn't sleep because of a trauma that happened in your life. Someone died and you couldn't sleep for 3 or 4 days. You couldn't think straight. So if her levels are lower and she can't function, then she can't think either. You got high levels of cortisol and adrenaline. Imagine being in an adrenaline rush for 3 or 4 days. That's your life. And that's why so many people find it, because adrenaline's like a good drug. Actually, it's the best drug because it's natural. And so if she's been on an adrenaline rush for days, and then all of a sudden you find her a home that's safe and everything, but her life is full of, I living on the edge all the time, and she calls you and goes, I'm bored. I can't stay here. The reason why is because that adrenaline, she's safe, she's slowed down, and there's nothing happening in her life to have that consistent urgency. I don't know how many times, and I remember myself, I was bored. Life was supposed to be like this all the time. Something, you have to protect yourself, you have to do something all the time, and it wasn't always like that. And so once you actually start to live normally and all that slows down, you've taken away the best drug I had, you've taken away my adrenaline. So think about that over a period of time and how that would affect you and wanting that. Anxiety and panic attacks. I want to talk about those because we think of an anxiety attack as a person screaming and yelling and all of that, and that's not necessarily anxiety. Anxiety attacks happen 3 different ways, and we know it as reactions to trauma: fight, flight, or freeze. And for many, many years, we just did fight or flight. But now we've got fight, flight, or freeze. And what happens is, so you're going to fight your way out of something, or you're going to run from it. But freeze is where we're just now learning what that means. And freeze means I don't know if I can fight, I don't know if I can run, and so I do nothing. And that can be a fetal position in a corner under a bed. It can be literally you talking to me, and I have no reaction. I mean, I'm just stoic. I mean, nothing. There's nothing going on. It's like my body's here, but nobody's home. So we have to be very mindful of that too, because anxiety or a panic attack doesn't mean this necessarily. It can mean any one of those. Self-destructive, risky behavior is an affect of stress. Of course, PTSD, we talked about that. Trauma bonds. And I know we had talked about a little bit before about Stockholm Syndrome. If you're not familiar with what Stockholm Syndrome is, please do your research on it, because Stockholm Syndrome starts as abused children. And it's where for those of you who aren't aware of what Stockholm Syndrome is, it's actually where the person who is a victim defends or becomes attached to the abuser. When kids are abused, who do they defend?
The abuser.
The abuser, whether that's their parent or co-parent or uncle or aunt or whoever it is, they defend that person, especially if that person's their caretaker. And that's the one who's giving them love, that's providing them shelter, that's providing them food. That's who they're going to defend. And so Stockholm is that bond, that trauma bond. Disassociation, I do want to touch on that for a minute, because disassociation is like anxiety attacks. It happens in different ways. There are years of my life that I have no memory of. I remember bits and pieces of it. I remember like the most traumatic events. I could not put it in linear form if you asked me to. Matter of fact, I've done a timeline of my life, and I've got stuff that's kind of like out here because I knew it happened between 17 and 21. I just don't know if it happened at 17 or at 21. Disassociation sometimes becomes a way of life. Literally, it's where your brain shuts down because of the abuse that's happening in your life. You can no longer emotionally deal with it. Now, the good news about disassociation is actually can help people survive. You know, I had someone a few years ago ask me what disassociation looked like for me. Because I've heard kids that talked about, well, I go to my happy place, I go to the beach, or they've got this mountain scene or this cabin or a scene in their head they go to. For me, I didn't. And I've actually talked to some other women that they had pretty much the same thing I did. Is it's like if we were in here and we cut off the lights because we don't have any outside windows, it would be completely dark. For me, disassociation meant I could cut off my light switch. That means, Renee, you and I could have a total conversation. I could respond appropriately, but would walk away and never remember anything you or I said. I have people today that have said, well, we talked about this, and I'll be like, no, we didn't, because it'll be from several years ago, and it's not just my age. I'm not going to let y'all tell me that. It's not just my age. It's the fact that during that time I was disassociated. And I can remember the very first time that I was able to identify in my body that I was about to disassociate, and it was actually in a meeting for Wellhouse that I was going into, and I don't know what happened right before it, if it was a noise or something, but I remember going, wait, you're about to check out, and you've got to stay focused during this. You can't check out. But for the first time, I was able to physically identify it, and it took me years, and I don't know what the physical identification was. It's not like I can explain it, but I knew I was about to black out. I mean, my kids have even told me from years ago that they've had full-blown conversations with me, and I've given permission to do, and I don't remember. So, and I just have no memory. And so we have to look at disassociation a little bit differently than we've looked at it in the past also. So, what's next? Now that we know what happens to the brain, how do we help the victim, and what are their needs? So do we want, well, let's look at the video. We're going to look at a video right here.
Yep.
Well, that's me. We want to look at the video right here, and after that, we'll take a break after the video, okay, and then we'll come back and talk about what's next.
Okay.
Okay.
I met this guy through a friend of mine. We hit it off and ended up living together. Things were going well until he began pimping me. When I told him I didn't want to anymore, he would beat me and force me to make money. By 15 years of age, I was pregnant, an alcoholic, and a crack addict. I was a lost soul living on the street with no hope and spiritually dead. I resembled and lived like I was Satan's daughter. I was mean, dirty, and pitiful. I only felt hate and disgust in myself, people, and life. I used drugs every single day. I was a thief, liar, abusive, and disrespectful. I sold my body, soul, and mind to men. I gave up my children and my family and every job I ever had. I wished I would die. At this point, I felt like all men looked at me as though I had a stamp on my forehead that said, "It's okay to take advantage of me." I was lonely, insecure, and did not feel normal. I hated God. I thought His purpose for my life was to be an example of what He wanted His children, of what He never wanted His children to become. I was raped, beaten, and left to die on the streets. I spent a total of 8 years in prison and jail with 32 different charges. I was at a breaking point, and that is exactly where God needed me. I found information about a place that helped other women like me. I called the number and talked to this lady that asked me if I wanted to be treated like the princess I am, and if I wanted to be loved abundantly just the way I was. She said I could come to the well house. I had never been there and did not know anyone, but I knew God wanted me there. I told her yes with some excitement and a sense of hope. Imagine that, me and hope in the same sentence. I never thought that would happen. Only by the grace of God and many prayers was I able to escape. The well house has showed me that I am not the only one that needs grace and forgiveness, but that God gives me His never-ending grace no matter my past. I am at the well house because I want to be, and God wants me to be. All I know is I have surrendered to Him and allowed Him to break the chains that once bound me. The well house is nothing but a miracle from God sent to rescue me and other women like me.
Welcome back to our program. I want to remind our viewers that if you have any questions, the number is on your screen as well as the email address. So feel free to go ahead and get those questions in. Tuan?
All right, so we ended with a video, and I kind of wanted to show that video so people will get an idea. That's actually, an intern did that for me, and the phone call was made when I was answering our crisis line all the time. But those are several different stories and just some of the trauma that the girls have gone through, because those are actual stories of girls, and I call them all girls, I don't care that they are over 18, that we've helped. So I wanted to kind of show that so we could go into the levels of care. Because there's 3 different levels of care, and I'm going to go over the levels pretty quickly, and then I'm going to slow down and we'll go into them, go over them in a little more detail. So our first level of care is immediate, which is your crisis intervention, safety, shelter, mental health, clothing, that's stuff that you need immediately. That's stuff that says, let me get you situated and then I can talk to you. And so the next level of care is interim. So it's your counseling and your stabilization, your family needs, your housing, employment, potentially legal support. And then we have long-term care. That's your permanent housing, your life skills, family reunification, or substance abuse treatment. And so going into these in a little bit more detail, our crisis intervention. Because what happens is when you meet a woman, what I have found, if you don't meet her basic physical needs immediately, then you're not going to reach her. If she's hungry and her stomach is growling, she is not going to be able to focus, because we just talked about all those other stress factors that she's got going on too. And so if she's got those stress factors, which are psychological and emotional and mental, and then she's got a physical issue, that she's hungry, or she doesn't have clothing, or her clothing is inappropriate, or her clothing is wet because she just walked in out of the rain and she has nothing. If we're not going to meet those immediate needs, then we're not going to be able to reach her, and so that's why these are so important. So talking about crisis intervention, if we're intervening, we need to look at some of our resources, and what I'm praying is that not only are we going to talk about the list of resources that I provided, but we're going to talk about resources that we have already as social workers and nurses. Because we have emergency room, we have rape crisis centers for those immediate physical trauma crisis intervention needs. And my suggestion is to everyone is find that person who works find a nurse that works at the ER. that you can call. If, say, for instance, Renee, you work at the ER, and I call you and go, Renee, this is Twan. I've got someone, and this is a situation, and this is what I think is going on, and she could potentially be a trafficking victim, but I need a forensic evaluation done on her. But because I've told her that, because I've told you it's a trafficking victim, and you and I have already had conversations, you're going to be a little more aware of what to do. You know, you're going to know to call a SANE nurse. And everybody knows what a SANE nurse is, right? Hopefully. A sexual, what is SANE? A sexual abuse. Oh, now I can't think of what SANE stands for. Now I'm upset because I can't think of the name of it. But we have more SANE nurses in Alabama than we've ever had. And those are the ones that are specific for sexual abuse examinations. So that person at the ER is going to know to call that. So she has more of her, so she's able to empathize with her more and be able to meet her at her level. So we need to look at that. Safety. Let's talk about safety being an immediate need. So I'm a 16-year-old and I'm coming to your office and you have found that I've been trafficked. You're a mandated reporter. You're a mandated reporter. Let me say it one more. You are a mandated reporter. You have to report this. This is some good news for you. You don't have to report it to just one agency. This is where you cover yourself. Because I'm a social worker. I'm a mandated reporter. So what I do is I'm going to call Renee at the health department and go, Renee, I've got a 16-year-old that I know has been trafficked. And I'm calling to let you know, and here's the bio. Here's her name. Here's all this stuff that you need to know. Oh, guess what? When I hang up with you, I'm calling FBI. And when I hang up with FBI, Renee, I'm calling DHR. And then I hang up and I call FBI. And then I say, FBI, I've called Renee. This is a situation. This is the child. This is what's going on. This is what I need your help with. And I've already called Renee. And when I hang up with you, I'm calling DHR. Or whoever it is, call more than one person. Because what happens is we need a team of people around her. Because trafficking is so new and we're just now getting started as far as with services, we need a team. And we don't need to report it just to DHR or just to the health department or just to local law enforcement or just to FBI. We need to report it across the board. And if it's a juvenile, she don't have to admit it. If she's a juvenile, you can actually call while she's sitting in your office, and I don't care if her pimp is in the lobby, and get law enforcement. Local law enforcement has to respond. They have to respond and they have to come get her. She does not have to admit to you she's trafficked. And she may not admit it. The other side of that is that's their issue. You've done what you're supposed to do. But don't call and not tell her you're calling. Don't call don't walk outside with a cell phone and call and haven't told her, because she needs to know. She needs to know because you're trying to build trust with her and you're trying to build a rapport with her. But you're a mandated reporter. Call more than one. And I strongly, shelter. If she needs shelter, there are actually 3 places that I've got more places listed, but the 3 I listed here are Well House, and that's for adult women. We've got Family Connections for teenagers. They will take them immediately 24 hours a day. And then we've got Camille's Place that's going to be opening this year, and I'm really excited, and that's for children. And that will be the first shelter in Alabama for children, because we don't have one now that's specific for trafficking. Other immediate needs, medical care. If she needs amoxicillin because she's got an STD, she's not going to be able to function with you until she knows that those needs are being met. If she's got mental health needs, and most of the time as social workers and nurses, we've worked in the field long enough and have enough experience, hopefully, or we have someone with us that has enough experience that we can tell if there's a mental health issue, that she may need psychiatric treatment, or she may need immediate psychiatric help, and that may be something you need to attend to. Another immediate needs that we're talking about is clothing, personal items, food. If those 3, those are actually, to me, top priority. Because once I meet those 3 needs, then those other, even though all of these needs are immediate, then I can see I can talk to her. Mm-hmm. She's not hungry anymore. She feels like she's comfortable in her clothing. You know, her breasts aren't hanging out, or her buttocks aren't hanging out anymore. And then she feels actually presentable and can talk to you. Personal items. Oh my gosh, if she hadn't had a shower in a few days because she's been on the road, you might want a little personal hygiene kit in your office just to say, here, if you want to go wash up in the bathroom, come back and let's talk. And that's not putting her down. That's offering her something that she might need. Or the fact that she's on her cycle and she doesn't have a sanitary napkin or she doesn't have a tampon. Offer her, keep them. These are actually, people come to me because I keep all this stuff in the trunk of my car regularly because I know I can go out and get it and if they need it. And I promise you, I can remember there was a particular time that we were out in the streets and one of the girls that we were out there talking to, she came to the door and she literally cracked the door of the hotel room or motel room. She was in, it wasn't a hotel. Cracked the door and she said, do you have a tampon? And so, of course, all the ladies that we're out there with, we don't have purses or anything, so everybody's like, no. I happen to be across the street, and so one of the ladies knows, and she's like, Tawan, I know you've got some in your car. Can you bring her some? And so I handed her some, and she took them back to this young lady. That lady called our crisis line about 3 hours later crying. And this is what she said. She said, can you come get me? I need your help. And she's crying. She says, nobody's ever loved me enough to give me a tampon. So I was able to change her life for it because of a personal hygiene need. So meet them. Detox is a big deal in regards to opiates, whether they're legal or illegal. Street, it doesn't matter. Detox is a big deal. And detox is hard in the state of Alabama. I know it's hard, but sometimes we may have to have that immediate need met. Especially if she's been on heroin or some other or a prescription medication that's an opiate, she may need, because physically she could die. The other thing is alcohol. Alcohol actually kill you. Coming off of alcohol doing over a number of years can kill you quicker than coming off an opiate can. The DTs, you can just die. So they may need detox, and that is an immediate need. That's not a we're going to wait till next week need, because she may not make it to next week. And then some of the legal opiates, methadone and methadose, it's harder physically to kick those than it is heroin. The addiction to that is much greater, and the physical part of the addiction to that. So, all right, interim needs. Counseling. In regards to counseling, we need someone with specialized trauma training. And I don't necessarily just mean training for human trafficking. I mean a trauma-specific counselor. You have counselors throughout. We have counselors everywhere. And I really recommend that you find the counselors in your area that are willing to do some pro bono work, number one, and that have done some specialization in trauma, because she needs trauma treatment. And you need a counselor who's going to talk to her across the board. And when I say across the board, I mean physical, emotional, mental, and spiritual, because all aspects of our life are things that help us heal. We can't leave one out. We have to deal with all of them. Stabilization. She needs a consistency in workers for those helping and those that are helping. Renee, I don't need you to pass it off to me.
Right.
If you've gotten to know her. I mean, there's sometimes you can't help that, but I don't need that to happen. She needs a consistency. She needs to know she can trust you. She needs to know you're going to be there. There has to be some kind of stabilization across the board for her. Safe housing. If you're going to do long-term, or if you're trying to get to the long-term point, she needs to know she's safe. She's got to have a safe place to be. Now, you may not have to provide that. That's okay. But you need to know that where she's at is safe, and she needs to know that you'll be there for her, that you can be there for her. Family needs. If her kids need uniforms for school, and believe me, trafficking victims do have custody of their children. We have some in Wellhouse now. If her kids need uniforms for school, and she can't buy them, that's going to bother her more than anything else at the moment, especially if they go to school next week or if they need a backpack. So you've got to look at the whole family dynamic during that situation. Employment. You need to see if she's employable or if she needs to go to school. You've got to find these things out. Legal support. She needs her own attorney, especially if she's going to prosecute. If she's willing to testify against the pimp, or if she happens to be a minor that she doesn't have to testify just based on who she is and her age, then she's going to need her own attorney. She needs someone who's going to protect her, because trials aren't nice. Ever nice. So long-term needs. Permanent housing. I know we have Shelter Care Plus in Birmingham. Do y'all have Shelter Care Plus throughout the state?
I'm not sure.
Do we know? I know we have it in Birmingham, and it's another shelter program with Section 8, subsidized housing. Different. You need to find areas, and she, based on trafficking, it can be considered a disability, and you can also link in the if there are addiction issues. That sometimes is looked at as a disability also, and can get her in places that she may not be eligible for otherwise. Other long-term needs is she's going to need life skills training. The things that most people take for granted that people know are the things she's going to need to learn. Imagine if you have a child at home and you've just bought them a car. What are you going to teach them? How to put the gas in, how to change, or how to check the oil if it needs changing, or that they need to change it every 3,000 to 5,000 miles according to what year the car is. You need to teach them across the board the simple stuff, and we take that stuff for granted. Mm-hmm. How to change a tire, how to balance a checkbook, how to open a checking account. These are the type of things that we as a society take for granted, and she may ask you or be afraid to ask you because it seems so trivial. But long term, we've got to teach her to survive, and she's going to need this stuff. The financial management, I was just talking about balancing a checkbook, how to open the account. What do you do? What is an IRA? What is a 401k? Okay, my job, I just applied for a job and it says it offers me a 401k. What's a 401k? I've never heard of that. I don't know what that is. I don't know what paid time, I don't know this stuff. And so she's going to need someone in her life that's going to say, that's not going to look at her and go, oh my gosh, you're stupid. Do you know what I'm saying? Because she's just ignorant. She just doesn't know, or he doesn't know. And we've got to go, for long term, we've got to be able to meet those needs. Other long-term needs is family reunification, which may or may not be possible, but we've got to look at the possibilities she wants it. There may be cases that it's not wanted, and that's okay too, or not possible when it comes to giving up children for adoption, or termination of parental rights has happened when it comes to kids, or the parents don't want anything to do with her because of their religion or their beliefs, or she's just burned the bridges is what we look at. We call it in life, but that's not necessarily true. Substance abuse treatment. She may need long-term substance abuse treatment, and that's okay too. But I promise you, after that substance abuse treatment, you're going to have to go back to the very beginning of what we were just talking about the immediate needs, because once she gets out of there, you're going to be back at square one. So this may be a long-term need and a long-term goal, but we've got to go back to square one and look at the physical stuff and the next steps for her. And we've got to be able to address those. Do y'all have any questions anywhere in here about any of that? Ideas, thoughts, complaints? No? Okay. So in this one, I want to go into a little detail about this one, and I brought my own notes. So I know as social workers and nurses, we're taught about interviewing, but I think over a period of time we forget. And there are some things I think are very specific across the board, just in general for interviewing anyone. But there are some things that definitely need to be addressed and or not addressed to prevent re-victimization, because we can re-victimize just like that unaware. And so that's why I think we need to brush up on our interviewing. So ground rules. Be non-judgmental and kind. And that you would think that most people would think that, but our biggest question is, and that we want to know as a human is, why'd you wear that purple? Because you knew I was wearing mine? Do you know what I'm saying? Right. Why is our biggest question. And I can ask anyone in the world, why did you make X decision at X point in your life? And you can look at me and go, I don't know. And you realize the next day or the next week or whatever, that was like a stupid decision that you made, or a bad decision you made. You don't know why you made that decision. It appeared to be the best decision you could make at the time. But when I ask you why, what does that assume? Or what do you assume when I ask you that?
That there's something wrong with it.
There's something wrong with it, and there's something wrong with me. Well, as a victim or survivor of trafficking, there's something wrong with me, period. So when you ask me why, I'm going to immediately think that you're judging me. And I'm going to shut you down. I'm going to go back to what we were talking about before and disassociate. And you're not going to get any further with me. So we have to be non-judgmental. We have to be kind. And we have to take why. Why is only for reporters. There are 4 W's or what, you know, who, what, when, where, why. We don't want to know that. That's not anything we ever want to know. And we're going back to we need to address their immediate needs first. If we're not going to address those, then we're not going to get them. We can't engage in any kind of dialogue if those primary needs haven't been met. Time. And I'm going to go through some things that, I've got it on there. I just went out of order on mine. Check your environment. What does your office look like? Where are you at? Because I'm going to tell you something. As social workers, we're taught that we're supposed to be closest to the door in our office. I am not going to talk to you in that setting. If your door is the only door in and out of that office and you're between me and the door and you're interviewing me, I am not going to respond to you. Because I'm thinking, what if I need to get out? What if I need to escape? Regardless if whether I know you're going to hurt me or not, do you understand? But it is that immediate physical reaction. So you may need to do something a little bit different to where the door is the exact amount of space between you. Like y'all sitting parallel and the door is there to where both of you have access to it, to where you don't feel like you're in jeopardy and they don't feel like they're in jeopardy. Because if that situation happens, I can remember a time, I've done enough law enforcement trainings, and the very worst speaking engagement I did in my life. A woman invited me to it. It was me. It was horrible. I mean, I walked away from this engagement going, what happened? Because I did not know what had happened. I was like, Tawan, you do this. This is what you do. What happened? And I walked away, and it took me 2 days. And when I was training law enforcement, and I would say 98% of the law enforcement in there were in full uniform. That means they had their bulletproof vests, guns, and everything on. And the room it was in was one way in and one way out. And there were 81 police officers between me and the door. And now when I train law enforcement now, I show them, I hold my hands out initially so I can show that I'm physically shaking because of PTSD and the trauma I've experienced because of some of them abusing me. Well, this particular time, I just shut down. I mean, I just shut down because there was no way in and out. So when I train law enforcement now, I've actually turned the room around to where I know I have a means of escape. Not that I'm going to run out the door, but I need to know that I can, and I let them know. So you've got to have your environment, their environment has to feel safe. You have to make sure that they feel safe. And ask. You may not even need to interview in your office. You may need to go to, some places have a playroom or a therapy room or something. Go to one of those areas or something. That's a strong suggestion. Time. Allow for time. And I know in some situations that's so hard. But if you can't then reschedule something, especially if you think she's a victim of trafficking, you need time to build a rapport because it's not going to happen necessarily in that first setting. I hope it does, but it's not going to happen. Yes, sir.
I have a question.
Okay.
All right. So this email is from Montgomery County. It says, how do you determine if a person is a victim of human trafficking or they are a sex worker or a prostitute?
That's a really good question. And everyone can hear him when he asks the question? Okay.
Yes.
So there is no difference. She is being prostituted. Even if she looks you in the face and says, I am choosing to, she is a victim. There is no such thing as a sex worker. She may not understand her own victimization, but she is a victim. And I don't see strip clubs. First time I was put on a stage, I was 15. When my pimp was gone, the bouncer wouldn't let me leave. Pornography, you don't know what goes on behind that camera, just like the people here see me on camera. They don't know particularly how many people are in this room. You don't know what's going on behind that camera. And even if you go to talk to me a few years ago, I would have looked at you and said it was my choice because I did not understand my own victimization. And as long as it was my fault and I could fix it, then I didn't have to look at the trauma I had endured. So I don't believe there's any difference. Got any more questions?
Well, there was a response that said a SANE nurse is a sexual abuse nurse examiner.
Thank you, SANE, sexual abuse nurse examiner. See, I had the first two right. Thank you, whoever sent that in. So time. Any other questions before I go back? Okay. Allow them time to speak. Ask questions that will promote them or help them to engage in conversation as opposed to the rapid fire single questions or the yes or no questions. Be flexible. While there are certain goals you want to achieve, it's important to begin the empowerment process from the beginning and let her know or him know that they have a right, that they have rights, and that they deserve to be treated and respected, because they don't necessarily, especially this population, we don't know it. We don't know our value. We don't know our worth at all. Be upfront. Please, I'm going to tell you, I've worked for some state agencies, and I have done some things that most people would, I've had to remove kids, but no one was ever mad at me. I mean, they were mad about the situation, but they weren't mad at me as a person, and the reason why is because I told them the truth up front. Well, let me tell you something, Renee. You got high on meth last night. I'm going to have to, you got some consequences behind that. I can't leave the 6-month-old baby in your home with you, and you're the only one here. I can't, I've got a kid at home. This is my job, and this is what I have to do. Be upfront with them. Tell them the truth. Okay, I'm going to have to report this. If you tell me you're going to hurt yourself or somebody else, I have to report it. That is my responsibility. You're 14 years old. I don't care that you say you're in love with him and he's your boyfriend. He's selling you for sex. I have to report it. Are y'all here? You have to report it. You're a mandated reporter. Under the age of 18 is not a choice in regards to being trafficked. I don't care if they're a runaway or homeless. They are not choosing to, and it's against the law. And whoever's doing it to them is breaking the law. And if you perpetuate that, you're breaking the law too. You're a mandated reporter. You have to tell it. Tell them you have to. I don't mean be mean to them. Just say this is what has to be done because I'm trying to protect you. But if you're not upfront with them, I'm not going to believe anything you ever say again if you don't tell me the truth. If you don't tell me this is the consequences of this, then I'm not going to know any different. Ask for permission. Ask them for permission for things. Renee, if I want to give you a hug, I need to ask you for permission. I need to ask you for permission to talk to someone else. Do you want me to call your mom? Is it okay if I call your mom? Can I call your daughter? So say this woman's in her 40s and she's got a 20-year-old daughter. May I please call your daughter and let her know you're okay? May I call whoever? Ask for permission. May I go get you some more clothes? May I buy you something to eat? And I know that you may think that's not, but it's validating their person and who they are. If you have to use a form or take notes or whatever, let them know. Look, we need to have a conversation, but this is part of my job, and are you okay with this? Is this okay with you? And if they're not, just put the pen down. You can write it down later. I know that's part of your job, and I know you got a case file to do. But let me tell you something. All of you with the case files, if I see another case file that says became sexually active when she was 9, I'm going to vomit. A 9-year-old can't be sexually active, and trust me, I see these. You can't say became a prostitute when she was 14. No, she was trafficked when she was 14. We have to change our whole, we have to go back to what I was saying earlier. We've got to think outside the box. We've got to change the way we think about all this. Yes, sir.
I got a couple more questions that have come in.
Okay.
Have you encountered victims that come to you for help and then continue to go back over and over, and how do you handle that?
Absolutely. We encounter, actually, one of the things I talk about is domestic violence victims. It takes 5 to 7 times to leave, for her to leave permanently. From what I've seen, and just the girls I've served that I've helped over the past few years, 11. It takes us 11 times of going in and out. She may leave your office and go right back to her pimp every single time for a long time, and you've got to love her, accept her right back again where she's at. So yes, she will repeatedly go back.
And we also have a phone call from New York, so let's take that right now. We'll get back to the email questions. New York, go ahead with your question.
Yes, hi. So we're calling from Westchester County Department of Social Service, the State Poverty, Human Trafficking, and Labor Trafficking. My question is, what has been the response in Alabama from law enforcement when you're calling in like a minor who's being trafficked?
For local law enforcement, sometimes it takes a little bit of talking to. For state level law enforcement and for federal law enforcement, we have had a really good response.
Okay, good. Okay, thank you.
What is your response in New York?
It's been it's a work in process because the legislation here is new as well, and everybody's learning.
Absolutely, and one of the things that I remind myself regularly is that in regards to law enforcement or any kind of delegation, it's a really big ball to start rolling, but once you get the momentum and you get it to rolling, then it's a lot easier and people actually get it. So it sounds like if you've got some stuff going that you've started the ball rolling.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Another question here from Montgomery County. How do you get information out to victims that are in high traffic areas concerning resources like Well House or other resources? How do you get them to reach out to you?
Well, one of the ways you can get them to reach out is we do pass out pamphlets, cards. Our National Human Trafficking Resource Center actually has index cards or business cards that you can pass out anywhere or leave anywhere. There's posters that can go into restrooms. There's all kinds of ways. You can hit the streets yourself with training, please. And if you need to get in touch with me about that kind of training, please get in touch with Renee, and I'll be more than happy to help you in that area. But you can get the word out. We can get the word out.
You mentioned earlier that you were on the street on Monday. So what were some of the things maybe you were doing there that?
We go out as a group, and our primary goal is to reach the girls, but we go out and spread the love of Jesus. We're going out as a Christian group to let people in the community know that they're loved and cared about. But our goal or motive is to reach the girls that are in the area to let them know that there are resources and they can be helped.
Do you find opposition?
Absolutely, we find opposition. This past Monday, one of the girls wanted to pray with us and couldn't pray with us because her pimp was close by and he wouldn't let her.
You ever physically threatened by the pimps?
We have not. We do go out we have a police officer's plain clothes that goes out with us. No more questions?
That's it.
Okay. So let me go to my next slide. I moved it there, but didn't move it here. So some more ground rules for interviewing is be mindful of your language, your verbal language and your body language. Sometimes we speak in ways that are judgmental, that we don't necessarily see as judgmental. And so a lot of times when I'm trying to reach someone, I will ensure that I'm using words that I would use like with my 16-year-old. And it's not I'm trying to dummy down anything, but I want to use terms that I know that they understand and not try to speak over their head because that makes people feel judged also. I've even practiced saying stuff in the mirror. I have. I'm horrible at saying no to people. And so I've actually practiced going, no, I can't do that right now. I'm like, no, that's just too cheesy. No, I'm not able to do it. Seriously. So language. Minimal interjections. Limit your interruption. If they're talking, let them talk. They may answer every question on your assessment or your agenda in the process of them talking. So if they're asking, even if you want to ask a question in the middle of it, write the question down and tell them, say, look, I'm writing the question down. I don't ask a question, just write it down and ask when they're done. Because you may get, even the question you write down, you may get the answer to that question in the process of them talking. So be mindful of your interjections. Meet her where she is. When I train law enforcement or police, one of the things I tell them is don't stand over her. Don't stand up. Matter of fact, it will be better for you to be lower than her. So if your chair, like our chairs here, Renee, are about equal, but you know how you can lower your chair? Men, if you're a man and you're having the interview, I would totally suggest you lowering your chair to make her feel like, because anybody that's over you, you feel is in power and authority. And so just meet her where she is and look at her or look up to her. It's what the way I would say it. I mean, visually, look up. Respect her boundaries. If she says, I'm not going to talk about that, or if she doesn't want you this close to her, or she does this, or whatever, respect that. Don't try to push her. She's been through enough. She doesn't need your help and re-victimize. She doesn't need you to re-victimize her. And you may think that something as simple as this is okay. It's not. Because I know in the South we're bad about doing this kind of stuff. Mm-hmm. We're lovey-dovey people. Are you laughing? Are we not that kind of people? I mean, we're loving. I want to love on you, especially if you tell me you're going through something. Then I want to really love it. Oh, really? I want to really love on you then. So be mindful of that, because this may appear to be loving to you. And I want to tell you, I had a girl that I was helping, and I took her to church. And at church, we're even worse about this kind of stuff. And a woman walked up to her and put her arm around her, and this baby was under the bed for 3 days in a fetal position. I could not get her out. Now, I got under the bed and talked to her, but for 3 days, because of the trauma she had experienced in church, and it just threw her. And the woman, when she did it, because I had trained the church actually, knew immediately. She's like, oh my God, but she couldn't undo it. It was already in process. So just be very mindful. A lot of times for me, if I'm interviewing someone, I'll hold my hands on my lap like this, because I'm a touchy, huggy, lovey person too. And if I want to touch them, I'll say, may I? Can I? And if they say no, I'm not offended. It's okay. It's okay. Be transparent. Okay, forgive me. Okay, I'm just going to ask you and everyone here in advance, forgive me. And the reason I say it is because we are taught as social workers and nurses not to self-disclose. I'm not going to be transparent with you if I don't know you're human. When I talk to kids and I tell kids my story, I don't know how many times I've had a kid look at me and go, Miss Tawan, because you told me that, I'm going to tell you this. And I'm not saying for you to give them your life story. I'm telling you to let them know you're human too. Because right now, if you're my social worker, you're on this whole different platform than me. And you're not human, and you hadn't been through anything in your life. And if you don't have some kind of transparency with me, I'll be doggone if I'm going to be vulnerable with you. You will not get any of my stuff. I won't tell you anything because I've got you on a pedestal. I mean, you've got BSW or MSW or RN or whatever behind your name, or you're Miss So-and-so or whatever, so you're already above me. Even if I have degrees. Because of what I've been through, you're already above me. So if you're not transparent, then you're not going to earn her trust. It is earned. It is not expected. And she deserves to earn your trust, and you deserve to earn her trust. She is worthy of that. Let's see. Oh. Gang affiliation, I wanted to mention that. Be mindful of your clothing. Red and blue are the basic gang primary colors, like your blue. Yeah, I know, sorry. And I'm only saying that in reference to if you notice something along those lines, if you see someone come in with a lot of red or something on, and you can pretty much tell it's gang affiliated, and you had on something blue like that, I would put on a jacket or something. You can't go home and change clothes. But be mindful of what your clothing is. Because it could be gang affiliated, especially if you're in an area that you know there are gangs. And so that's one of the things I wanted to. So now, we're going to go back for a minute. We're actually going to sit here for a minute. I want one of the things I did want to talk about while we were here is our assessments. So the last time we did a training, we had some people, one of the questions was, which was a really good question, it said they wanted to know if I had to choose a few questions to ask out of the assessments, because you only have a limited amount of time, what questions would I choose? Well, I went through the assessment. I like the whole assessment. That's why I gave them to you. The but behind that one is we're going to look at the adult assessment first. And I know we can't bring it up on screen, but hopefully you have it in your hand and we can pull it out. So that's the Vera Institute assessment. And I'm going to share mine with you again. Okay. So if you look at the Vera Institute assessment, and actually what I will do is hold up the front of it. So can you see that on the camera? Hold that up. So that's the one we're looking at right now. Page 26. If you have a short amount of time, There is a short version, which I think is about 20 questions. Excuse me, page 25. It's about 20 questions, and you can do about 20 questions in about 5 minutes. This one is for adults. The Vera Institute is for adults. However, in breaking down some questions, I really like the section on page, yes, I'm on page 29 of the Vera assessment. And I'm talking about question 16. Did anyone ever pressure you to touch someone or have any unwanted physical or sexual contact? And if the answer, and I hate yes or no questions, but sometimes during assessments you have to have yes or no questions. So if the answer is yes, the next question will be, if you're comfortable talking about it, could you tell me what happened? And don't try to get them to go into any form or detail. But this is, and you say, okay, well, that could just be sexual abuse. Absolutely, that could just be sexual abuse. But if you've already got red flags of trafficking and you're asking this person this question, then you can go into some other questions. But still stay away from leading questions. And I know we want to do that sometimes. Did so-and-so, has someone at your house abused you? And I'm going to talk on the child's assessment. I'm going to show you what I mean by that. That's number 17. Did anyone take a photo of you that you're uncomfortable with? I would actually expand that. Has anyone ever taken a photo or filmed you that you were uncomfortable with? If the answer is yes to that, then you can go on. If you feel comfortable talking about it, can you tell me what happened? So you're asking, even though you're asking a yes or no question, if the answer is yes, you're following it up with, can you tell me more information? And usually if we go back to what we just talked about no interjection and keeping your mouth shut, once you ask that question, that yes or no question, they'll usually say yes, and they'll go into detail. They won't just stop at yes. Sometimes they will, because they're still very, very traumatized by it, but sometimes they'll go into detail. The next question under 17, what do they plan to do with the photo, if you know? You need to find out, especially if it's a kid. Number 18, this is one of my favorites. Did you ever have sex for things of value?
Not just money.
Not just money. That's what we were talking about earlier. Survival sex, money, housing, food, gifts, favors. That's trafficking. That's trafficking. Were you pressured to do this? And were you under the age of 18 when it occurred, if you're not already under the age of 18? And I strongly suggest you to use your gut instinct. I remember being 14 and saying I was 21, but the person in front of me had to know I was 14, or at least a juvenile. They had to know. They had to know. I look at babies now. There was one the other day, she says, I'm 21. I looked up and went, you are not. You can't lie to me. I've got babies. No, you're not. I was like, how old are you? She was 14. I'm 14. Why did, and I'm going, oh my gosh, because I confronted her. I was like, no, you're not. You're just not. And we don't want to do that. We want to say 21. Do my job. 21. And if it's obvious she's lying to you, say something. All right, so number 19, did anyone ever take your identification? Did anyone take or keep your identification, for example, your passport or your driver's license? Could you get them back if you wanted to? Because, sometimes, like me and you go to Six Flags or something, and you got a pocketbook. I don't want to carry mine and be like, put my ID in your pocketbook. That's normal kind of stuff. But we're talking about stuff that they can't get it back. Did anyone where you worked or did any other activities take your money for things, for example, like transportation, food, or rent? And, if there's 15 people living in one house, or even 4 people living in one 2-bedroom house, and the rent's $1,800 a month, you've got an issue. Something's going on. And so some of these questions are just to help you add up, to do the 1 + 1 = 2. So, and this one, page 29, is my favorite. If you have the opportunity, do the entire short version of the assessment. Again, I think it's only 20 pages. It actually ends at 29. And that last page is what, before it gets into the sex. Before this, I think it's partially labor trafficking. And then you've got some post-interview assessment that you can do. Again, these are really good tools to use. So now I want to look at the child's assessment. And that is that one. And that's the human trafficking screening tool. And talk about some of this entire assessment, especially this assessment. This is one of the ones that's one of my favorites, in regards to kids, because it really gets to the nitty-gritty of running away and some of the stuff. But we're going to touch on a couple of things. So some of this, actually this one's out of Florida, and both of these assessments, they're non-proprietary, okay? That you don't have to pay to use them. They are free across the board anywhere, but people just don't know they're available. And so I wanted to make sure, and that's why I brought them back again, because I think it's very important that everyone out there, especially in the social service profession, have these. So in this one, let's go to page 13. And the top, section F, leaving or running away from home. If you want to look through this assessment at the different headings that may help you in the area or service area you work in, that would be good. This one I really like because it talks about, have you run away, stayed away, or left your home within the past year? And this is when you're talking to a juvenile. How many times have you run away or left without permission? And I know these are specific, but I mean, if they're answering more than 20 times, you know there's some issues going on. There's something going on. How long were you gone the last time you left? Y'all remember what I said about that earlier? How many hours?
48.
48. 48. Do you understand why I say 48? It makes sense. Again, I'm going back to survival sex, especially for teenagers. Teenagers, you do not have to prove force, fraud, or coercion. If they're trading sex for food or rent or whatever, it's survival sex and it's trafficking. Period. Where'd you go when you left if there's evidence of excessive running away? Next page, 14. While you're away, how did you support yourself? Actually, my question is, and when I talk to teenagers, is, what'd you eat? What'd you have for lunch? Where'd you get it? I just want to know. Because at that point is when you actually, you can, and then you'll know. They'll give you signs, because I don't care that I thought I was 10 foot tall, bulletproof, and knew everything when I was 15. I wasn't that smart, and I still stumbled over stuff. While you were away, did you have any money, and were you in control of it? Who were you with? Where'd you go? And did they give you anything? Were you doing drugs? I don't care if you were. Well, heck, I'm going back to the being transparent. Heck, I've done drugs before. We're good. So, and don't do that. I didn't anyway. We're not going to go into that one. You know, what did they do? So that's just the opener if you know they've run away. So the next one is we were on page 14, skip over to page 16. And it goes back to those kind of the same questions we just had on the adult assessment. Has anyone ever pressured you to touch someone physically or sexually when you didn't want to? Tell me about it. Has anyone ever asked or made you to do anything sexually that you didn't want to? Tell me about it. And you can rearrange these questions and reword them to where they're not necessarily a yes or no question. But let me tell you something. Please don't ask number 41. I love this whole assessment except for that question. That question says, has anyone in your home ever done anything sexually to you that you didn't want? That is one of the most leading questions. Has anyone in your home? Well, Uncle Bubba came to visit. He don't live with me, but I'm not going to tell you. And on top of this is just leading. The question needs to be, has anyone, it's the same thing as above, has anyone ever done anything sexually that you didn't want? It doesn't need to be in your home. I just stay away from all the leading stuff. So those are the ones that if you were going to pull anything from these assessments, these would be the ones I pull. Now, I've given you a great resource. This is the last thing we're going to go over. Have you got questions coming in?
Well, I do have a response. Somebody sent back in about the same nurse. It's sexual assault nurse, not sexual abuse.
Oh, sexual assault nurse.
And the qualifications for a forensic nurse who have received special training to conduct sexual assault evidentiary exams for rape victims. Not all, but many SANE programs are coordinated by rape crisis centers rather than hospitals.
They absolutely are. There are SANE nurses that are available, like for the CHIPS clinic at Children's Hospital, and the CHIPS clinic at Children's Hospital in Birmingham is the one specific for children that have been sexually abused or raped. They go there. But your rape crisis centers are a beautiful, beautiful resource for you. in regards to forensic evaluations. And most of them throughout the state have beautiful accommodations to where I understand it's got a table with stirrups, but it has carpet on the floors. They'll give you new clothing. You get like a brand new set of clothes because most of the time they take their clothes. A lot of times they'll have volunteers, and our rape crisis centers are a huge resource. And so I strongly suggest you get in touch with someone at your local rape crisis center to find out who to get in touch with. Who do you contact there? And they're usually 24/7 because they have to be. So thank you whoever sent that in, because that's absolutely true. And sexual assault nurse examiner. I'll remember that. I'm horrible sometimes with acronyms. So the last thing is our Alabama Victim Service Providers for human trafficking victims. Now, if you can print this in color, please do, because the ones that are in red are the shelters. If you can't print it in color, hold on, it changes a little bit the way it looks. It doesn't look bolded as the rest of them do, but there are huge resources. You've got your DHR directory is on here, and this gives you a website, and after number hours, you've got your Alabama Coalition Against Rape, your Alabama Fusion Center. And let me tell you about this, because actually Teresa Collier, it's on page 1 at the very bottom. She's the one who put this resource list together, and I love this woman dearly. The Alabama Fusion Centers, if you're not aware of what fusion centers are, and I think every social worker nurse in the state needs to be aware of what fusion centers are. Once 9/11 happened, Homeland Security developed a subset of Homeland Security, which is your fusion centers. And they are there to do exactly what they say is fuse. They are a law enforcement agency, but they're not a law enforcement agency. In other words, they don't go out and do arrests. They're an information gathering agency, because what we learned from 9/11 is that we had a lot of information and no one was sharing it, and we could have prevented it. So every state has a fusion center, and some states with the population to allow for it have more than one. And every state in the fusion centers, they have analysts, and most of them, if not all of them, have a human trafficking specific person. So this is a great resource. This is one of the ones that I will call. If I don't know what local law enforcement agency to call, I call a fusion center, because she will know who to call to report it to. And I will know that she will get in touch with multiple, because Teresa is actually the human trafficking specialist for our fusion center in Alabama. But she will get in touch with multiple people to share the information. And so what the fusion center is, they are the organization that gathers information and shares information that is needed for law enforcement, DHR, that type of stuff. So, huge resource. Anyway, you've got, literally, this is your service provider. It's 7 pages of, oh my gosh, my name's in there. I did not realize that. I'm sorry, when you see your own name, it just kind of jumps out at you. But there's all kinds of stuff for services that are statewide and that can assist you. But please, please, please make sure you know your local rape crisis centers, your local DV shelters that can give you immediate resources, and someone local at DHR that you can call, especially in regards to children. So
this is like a toolkit.
This is absolutely a toolkit, and this was actually just developed this year. So after the last, she was still compiling this, and so this is just a great resource to have. It's a great handy desk reference that you have it right there for you. So, and now we go to our references, and there's just some websites. Polaris Project has a lot. That's where our maps came from the very beginning. Into Alabama is our state human trafficking task force. It's some of the you can get information from there, and the resources where I got about the brain development. And Intervene is our Shared Hope International, is where I got some of our interviewing techniques, or to give me more information on to help you all about interviewing techniques and to go in more depth. So,
do we have any other questions?
I have a question.
Okay.
What is the ratio of boys versus girls being victims of human trafficking?
Her question is, what is the ratio of boys versus girls being victims of human trafficking? I wish I could tell you that. We say about 85% of trafficking victims are female. Yes, 85% are female, and probably about 60% of those are juvenile. The issue with boys being trafficked is men and boys are taught to be strong and be big, and you're not supposed to be hurt, and you can't be hurt. And many boys are taught that they can't be raped, which is not true. The other thing is, when it comes to trafficking victims that are male, there are 98% of them are heterosexual, but they're used for homosexual purposes, which skews the way they think about themselves. And so even though they're heterosexual, they are identified as homosexual because that's the way that they're being purchased. And so they're very confused and don't necessarily know how to identify or what to identify. And they definitely don't know who to tell. Their first home in the United States is about to open for boys in North Carolina, and they will only have 4 beds. It is an underserved population, and the other underserved population is transgender. I actually got a phone call yesterday about a 24-year-old transgender that I'm going to help get placed soon. But I only know of one place, or actually 2 places, that will help her. And it's a male, well, physically male, identifying as a female. And it's just very underserved. This is a whole new service area that we're getting into in regards to trafficking. And there's so many gaps in services that we have got to address this issue. Even more so than what we're doing today. We need more people to step out on a limb and open homes. So.
Are there grants available for different types?
Are grants available? I will tell you from my experience with Well House. I opened Well House. I was on food stamps, and I had $33 in a Well House account. For 2.5 years, I did not get a salary. We have gotten some local foundation grants, but most of our money comes from people who write checks, and it's taken us about $80,000 a month. Now, we are faith-based and Christ-centered, which gives us another opening because a lot of churches support us. We're in their budget. As far as a lot of money to open shelters, grant-wise, no. Well, Renee, thank you, and thank you guys. This is awesome. It's always an honor to be here, and I'm always tired when I leave because I feel like I've talked enough for the whole week today. But I hope you got some different ideas and different ways to approach it and understand how to keep yourself safe in regards to reporting across the board, and interviewing skills. And please don't think a pimp's going to come after you ever, and he's not. And let me tell you why. Because he can replace her just like that. So please don't have that concern.
So it's not worth his effort.
It's not worth his effort. He can go get him another girl. I'm going to leave you with a beautifully horrific quote from a reformed pimp. And I call it beautifully horrific because it's beautiful because it helps us to identify what's actually happened, and it's horrible because of what he said. He said, when I was in the game, I could go into any middle or high school event and point out 5 to 10 girls that would leave with me willingly within 30 minutes. He can replace her just like that. So
That's frightening.
that is frightening.
Well, thank you so much
Thank you.
for joining us. And I want to thank our audience for joining us, and we will see you next time.